In this video, I'm going to show you how we programmed a property valuation bot using n8n. Let's see what it looks like. So to begin with, we'd have a Google sheet that contains the properties that would be the input to what we're going to be appraising for a potential client. So this is targeted at property investors. So we have this sheet containing the properties and the different aspects of the property within the UK. So things like the address, the current rent, the market rent, date of final review, and things outstanding like the mortgage outstanding, the purchase price, and all the relevant information we need in order to do valuations later. And then what we then get is the open market value for each of those properties, and those properties will be linked by the property ID or the property row in that first page. So this first sheet contains the properties, and these other sheets contain the different outcomes from running different n8n workflows. But today's workflow is really about getting the current open market value and determining from the current market value any monies we can get from each property in order to refinance. So where that comes useful is in property development and in property investing. People buy properties, they hang on to those properties for a while, and then at some point when the property has appreciated, they're able to use the additional monies within the property to buy other properties. For as an example, some people who purchased property in London 10 years ago may have paid £800,000 for it, and then 10 years later that same property is now worth 1.2 million. So automatically you have a £400,000 difference between the current price and the initial purchase price. But then when you go to borrow against that money, that equity, banks wouldn't let you take the entire 400,000. They would do some stress tests. They would look at the rental values in the area and then look at how much you can afford based on the rental income, and then it will give you the difference. So that's where this automation comes in, because it does all of those calculations for you using information that's live. So let's have a look at what it looks like. So if I press execute workflow, it will come back with something similar to what you're seeing now. So we've got the entry point, which is where we just click execute. So it's a manual trigger for this workflow, and then the first thing it does is it sets a variable. Now if you're looking at my screen wondering why my workflow or the canvas looks the way it does, this is a self-managed n8n installation. So it's not the cloud version, this is the self-managed. So because it's self-managed, I believe some things might look different, but all in all it's the same process. So in this workflow we set some values. I don't want to show you this box because it contains some secrets, so I'm just going to leave the secret there, the key. The very next thing we do is we reach out to a tool, an endpoint, a property endpoint called property data, and with this property data we're able to extract the mortgage rates. So we get the mortgage rate. We need the mortgage rate for a calculation we'll be doing later down the line. And then the next thing we do is we go to the same Google sheet that we looked at earlier. The Google sheet with that sheet, one of the sheets in that Google sheet contains the finance terms. So the finance terms will be this sheet here, where we get the stress test percentage, the max loan to value, something, the internal calculation rate or something like that, ICR, I can't remember, and then how many void weeks you'd need to factor in. So the void weeks are important because the assumption shouldn't be from a property investor that you'd let the property for 52 weeks in a year. You're likely to have some voids, and those voids are accounted for. Roughly, people estimate those 4 weeks. So we factor that into the calculation. So we get the finance terms, and then we get the property. So this get properties is essentially pulling all of those 7 properties that we have on the first sheet within Google Sheets, all of these 7. And then we loop over each one of those properties. Now by default n8n does some sort of loop and triggers something for each row, but we found that whilst developing this, that even though it does it each time, if the next step in the loop is something like a HTTP call or an API call. It bunches all of the data together, and then that just causes the call out to our property data endpoint to fail. So that's why we have this loop over items, so that it runs all of these steps and then comes back, then takes the next one and then runs the steps again and then comes back. So that's what we're doing. When the loop starts, the very next thing it does is it checks to see if the area exists. So let's look at here, and you see on here we're looking at internal area. If you notice, there are two that are blank, right? So where is the condition? So if I open this up, you'd see so it checks to see if the internal area field exists and if the internal area is not empty. So it's very important that you keep this in mind when you're running your workflows, because what you might find is if you use the wrong check, it will just run through as though it'll give you the wrong result. So as an example, look at the first one. In the first one, I'm using an integer check, so that's to check whether the number is there, but the number could be 0, right? But in addition to that, I'm saying if it's not empty, and I'm not using the number checks. If I click on the drop down, you have a string check, that's why you've got a there, and then a hash there, which is or some people call it the pound sign, which is a number check. If you do the number check and say it does not exist, in this case it fails. So you have to do a string check to check that it's not empty, because even though there's nothing there, when the code is passed through the pipeline, it comes in as an empty string, and the number check treats that as existing. So that was one gotcha that I had to work out. So if the internal area exists, I send a different request to the property data endpoint. So if the internal area exists, what I then do is I capture all of the other bits of information and send that to the property data. So in some ways you need to have an idea as to how your endpoint works, so the API. If you know the values that are required by the endpoint, you need to generate those, or you need to capture those from the spreadsheet. So in my case, the property owner or the property investor would have put all of that information within the spreadsheet. And then as I pick each value up, I pick up the postcode. Postcode is crucial. We need that. Without the postcode, the endpoint wouldn't know what to do. So we'll pick up the postcode, we'll pick up the number of bedrooms, property type, the construction date, internal area, bathrooms, finished quality, outdoor space, off-street parking, and then key. So all of these things are needed for a property valuer to be able to evaluate a property. In this case, the endpoint I'm using is the valuation rent. So the valuation rent gets me the rent based on those different criteria. So if you look over here, property type, everything I just listed, it needs those in order to come up with a value, or come up with a value that's close to real as possible, because otherwise if it makes too many assumptions, then the value cannot really be relied on. So when we've got the internal area, the endpoint also checks based on how much space you have. So the next thing we then do is we get the price. The price is similar endpoints required because we know the size, so it's going to give us a more accurate value back. And then the next thing is we set some values. Now this set value here is very crucial, because what I'm doing is I'm running two different streams from this if statement. So this top one is when there's an internal area. If there's no internal area, what do? We call a different endpoint, just rents, and that rents one takes bedrooms, property type, and the key. So we don't. Why is my bedrooms red? That shouldn't be red. So it's saying it's undefined. Okay, so let's fix that. So number of bedrooms, and then property type. I think it's doing that because I cloned from the one above. So property type, and then key is still key. Okay, so that's that. right? So we go back. I'll execute everything in a bit. Yeah, so this goes yellow because it's not run. It's not run. So there's some values that haven't been populated fully. So that's that. Maybe let's have a look at this other one. So the endpoint on this one is also different. Yep, we're looking at, so that's giving me asking rents, but we don't need that. What we do need is let's get it from this if module. So this bit on the left hand side that I'm controlling, that's the bit where these are all the downstream or the upstream, all the upstream steps that were completed before getting to this step I'm working on. So this step I'm working on is the step that calls out to the property data endpoint to get me the information in connection with this property, where it's located, and the number of bedrooms. Now, if you need a value from a node that's run prior to this one, then you can just close out these boxes and then pull out the information from the downstream or from the upstream steps that have run. Hopefully what I'm saying does make sense, and if it doesn't make sense, just put a comment in the comment section and I'll be sure to address it. So here we've got the bedrooms. So bedrooms comes from number of bedrooms. So again, the reason it looks different from this JSON.postcode is that this value actually comes from not the step just before it. It's come from the step two. It's come from 2 steps before this one. So as a result, it would handle it differently. So the dollar is referring, this bit in the middle here is referring to the name of the step. So yeah, let's pull out the property type. Okay, so that's that. And then we go back. Right, so now these two are yellow, and then just to say again, this if statement is checking if the internal area of the property exists. If it exists, we go for the more in-depth and detailed query of the rent and the open market value. And if the area isn't provided, we go for one that's slightly less in-depth and less accurate, which is this one here. It's still usable. It's not completely out of range, because it still needs the number of bedrooms, and also it needs the postcode. So it's not just pulling a value out of the ether. It's pulling a value that's relevant, but it's dealing with something like the number of bedrooms rather than a number of bedrooms for a property that also has outdoor space, car park space, and other things that would be factors in terms of somebody wanting to rent a property. Okay, and then this next one, which is what led us to this long conversation, is I've used set value variables here so that down here I can use one step to handle the values that come in regardless of which path that it followed. So what I've done is I've captured all the relevant information I need, so like the current value that's come back, the mortgage balance, a weekly rent, a max loan to value. All these values are required for the next step, which is our code. So here is also a different fields node, and it's exactly the same names. So what then happens is within here, within the code that handles the calculations, I can just put one value in there. So, and the value will be input dot first JSON dot current value and mortgage balance. So all of those things can just be a bit more abstract, so that I don't have to have another code step before I go to the Google Sheets. So that's just a clever way of reducing the number of nodes that you have within the canvas. And it appears to work. So once that's done, the next step that happens is it then writes to the Google Sheet and then populates the different fields with the calculation that it's come up with. So now if we have a deeper look at the calculation that's run, now all the previous steps have provided information related to the property. So we have the current value, the outstanding mortgage balance, weekly rent, the void weeks, the max loan to value. All this information is relevant for the full calculation here, which tells us, okay, how much is the annual interest that somebody will be paying? And that's what's provided here. How much is the net cash flow? How much is a cash out? How much is a refinance equity? So all of these things are important. The stress test here, or the actual refinance loan, there's also some logic here. So this logic here says, okay, whichever one is lower between the stress test and the loan to value max, that's one you need to take. Why is that important? It's important because let's say we take the property that's 1.2 million. The maximum loan to value would be 1.2 million. 1,200,000 times 0.75 for 75%. So the maximum loan to value would be 900,000. But then if the rent is only £100 a week, then clearly that rent will not cover the outstanding mortgage that you're likely to be paying. So with the stress test and considering the interest you'd have to pay on the mortgage, whichever one is lower, that's what would be taken. So the stress test would say, okay, based on what you're earning and the stress test that we have to apply to the mortgage, we think that the maximum that you should be able to borrow is 300,000. So this step then does a min 300,000, the stress test value, versus the 900,000, which is the maximum loan to value you could get based on 75%. So as property investors, these are figures that need to be in your head. But right here is the valuation step that you need to run in order to know how much you can extract from your property, one, and secondly, how much the lender is possibly going to give to you. So if the lender is only going to give you 500k, then you know that's what you have to work with. So once that's done, this loop over items loops over everything, every record and every row in the Google sheet, and once it's done, it then passes the run up to this done pipeline. So this done pipeline then takes it and aggregates all of those results. Now the reason I aggregate all the results is that I want to pass the aggregated results to the large language model. So this is what the aggregated result looks like. So every single property starting from 0, 1 up to 6, because it starts from 0, and then here are the different values within each one. So status is empty because there's no status right now for this run, and then when it goes to the OpenAI's large language model, we're using 4.1 mini, and then the prompt I've given it two prompts: a system prompt and a user prompt. So the system prompt just tells it that you are a UK property investment reporting assistant. You will receive a JSON array of property objects under the key data, right? Because when it comes in here on the data, and it's told it what to do. So for each object contains these fields: address, postcode, cash out, net cash out, and other fields are also present. You can ignore them unless useful. Your task is to generate a JSON report in this structure, and then it's given it the structure. This is a system prompt. It's given it the structure, so it gives it a property identifier. So this is the key for the identifier. Then it tells us the max cash out, it tells us the net cash flow after refinance, and then a recommendation. And then equally, it needs to provide us with a total potential cash out and a final recommendation, an overall recommendation. So the user prompt is the one that contains the actual data. So it's very simple here. Here's the landlord's portfolio data, blah, and then please process this array of property objects and return valid JSON as per the required structure. Follow these instructions. For each property, we have the property identifier, the potential cash out, the net cash flow after refinance, and a short recommendation. Okay, so once it's done that, so it gives it these other two instructions. So calculate the total potential cash out across all properties and provide an overall recommendation. So that's all good. So now, once that's done, I take the information and then I put it in the Google Sheet as well. So we have a recommendation tab here, which says the total cash out and then any recommendation here. This is not rocket science for based on what it's come out with. So maybe with some further prompting, you could get it to say other things. But the key thing is we also have this tab that shows us every single property that can give us something out, and then it also tells us the which ones color coded, the ones that will give us money and the ones that wouldn't give us money. So that's where we are. This is quite neat, especially if you're a property investor, because we're using data, live data, current data. This is not finger in the air or phoning an agent to get an opinion. You can do this whilst you're seated at your desk, and you can use that and present it to valuers as well. You know, if they've downvalued your property or they've given an incorrect valuation, you can show this, and it's based on live information. And the raw information is also accessible in terms of the comparables that you can use. So once that's done, it populates those two sheets. So the refinance and recommendation, and the open market values. So if we go back here now, and then the final one is there's a Google Doc that it creates. This step here creates a Google Doc. This next one populates that same Google Doc with the information, and right now it just populates it with the JSON information, and then the Google Sheet is the very last thing that happens. So let's have a look, and let's click execute workflow. Okay, it's picking things up. So the second one is the one I'm interested in because that's what we changed just now. Let's see what that does. Okay, it's done the first one, it's done the second. Oh yeah, that's fantastic. So it's done two, right? So you can see it's executed the code. Obviously you want to make sure that the code is correct and the valuation is correct, and what you're presenting is actually what's expected by the landlord or by the investor, and what should be expected by any valuer whose valuation you want to dispute. You are allowed to dispute as much as you like, provided you have live information. So this is the n8n workflow running through, and once it's done, you'd see it go up the other chain now. So it's still looping. So it's done 6. I think there are just seven properties, and then it will go off to the OpenAI endpoint once it's done this one, and then it'll come up with a recommendation. So whilst it's doing that, let's have a look at what's being populated in the sheet here. So it's probably doing this last one now. Yeah. Okay, so it's now just completed that, and then you've got workflow executed successfully. Okay, so that's really it for the property valuation. But if you have any questions, for instance, you want to know how to add something to the canvas, so each one of these things I've pulled from the tab. So what you do is you click this plus here for any one of these steps. So for instance, the one that for Google Sheets, you just type in here in the search bar Google Sheets, and then it will come up with the Google Sheets, and then you can just drag it onto the canvas like so. Oops. Oh no, you click on that one, then it gives you different options. So in my case, I said update row in the sheet. So you click update row, and then this appears. So, and then you complete it. You know, in my case, I've got a connection credential already. I've got this sheet. I'm saying the sheet within the document, and then I'm saying update a row. Then here I get to choose. So the performance, portfolio performance, and then within the sheet, I select within the Google Sheets document. I then select which tab I want to update. So if I say results, so then it then asks me how to map because this is an update. So if it's an update, I'm saying change something that's already there. So you then have to tell it how to map it. So with different things, like you say property row, and then you have to tell it which values to update. So once they're all matched, then you're okay. In my case, if you choose property row, that essentially matches the row that's part of the input. So that's it. I think that should be it for now. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out. Anything you want to add in here, if you want access to this blueprint as well, I can send that to you. So until next time, thank you very much for listening and keep shipping.